The desert night lay silent until hooves broke the stillness. A weary horse stumbled into town, dust clinging to its hide, and no rider on its back. Instead, it carried a coffin strapped across its frame, creaking with every sway. The townsfolk froze, eyes wide, fear and curiosity mixing in their stares. Sheriff Collier muttered, "Hell's brought something strange tonight." The horse, trembling, dragged shadows across lantern-lit windows, its breath heavy as smoke. Behind lace curtains, whispers stirred, children clutched their mothers, and men reached for rifles. The coffin gleamed under moonlight, nails catching glimmers like stars. It spoke without sound, pressing on hearts heavier than lead. Eli Morgan stepped into the street, his boots crunching gravel, and he whispered, "This is no omen. It's a reckoning." The silence thickened, daring someone to open the truth the coffin carried. The townsfolk whispered like leaves rustling in the wind, each one afraid to step closer. A young boy asked his mother, "Why is there no rider?" She hushed him quickly, eyes darting to the coffin swaying. Sheriff Collier barked, "Stay back." His voice cracked with unease, and rifles lowered but did not vanish. Eli Morgan stood silent, the moon catching his scarred jawline as he measured the weight of silence. He thought of all the graves dug in this town, and how none were carried by their own steeds. The coffin loomed like an unsolved sin, heavy with unspoken truth. The air thickened, pressing against every chest. The horse stopped at last, trembling, its eyes rolling white, waiting for someone brave, or foolish, to touch the coffin's lid. Sheriff Collier's boots thudded against the porch as he descended, each step slower than the last. His eyes fixed on the coffin, yet his hand stayed near his revolver. Eli Morgan whispered, "Steel won't stop what's inside." Collier spat, "I'll decide that." The crowd murmured louder, nerves boiling into panic. A woman cried out, "Don't open it," but the sheriff pressed on. Dust swirled at his feet as lanterns flickered in the rising breeze. Eli's gaze never shifted, his mind torn between dread and duty. Every nail in the coffin glinted as though mocking the living, and the town's heartbeat echoed with the sheriff's hesitant steps. The horse neighed sharply, breaking silence like a gunshot. Its body shook, nearly collapsing beneath the coffin's burden. A man from the crowd muttered, "That beast ain't long for this world." Eli Morgan stepped closer, voice low, "Let it rest, Collier." The sheriff froze, jaw tightening, sweat rolling down his brow. The horse's breath rattled like wind through a crypt, its eyes rolling white. Dust swirled across the street, cloaking the air in gloom. No one dared to move, as though the coffin itself had cursed the ground. Eli clenched his fists, every scar of his past pressing like fire in his veins. The coffin creaked, wood straining as if something inside longed to be free. The sound froze every soul in place. Eli Morgan whispered, "This town's sins always find their way home." Sheriff Collier's face paled, his eyes betraying recognition. Whispers rippled through the crowd, suspicion rising like wildfire. A young man muttered, "Who's in there?" but no answer came. The coffin's weight seemed to bend the horse lower, dust swirling around like restless spirits. Eli's heart thundered, memories clawing their way back, each scar a reminder of betrayals long buried. The night deepened, carrying with it the taste of dread. The horse finally collapsed in the dust, its burden too great to bear. Silence fell heavy across the street, broken only by its ragged breaths. Eli Morgan stepped closer, his eyes fixed on the coffin as if it held the weight of every ghost he carried. Sheriff Collier barked orders to clear the crowd, but his voice trembled beneath his authority. Eli whispered, "Truth, don't stay buried forever." A boy tugged at his mother's sleeve, whispering questions she could not answer. The coffin lay ominous, casting long shadows that stretched across the dirt. Eli's thoughts drifted to the past, where betrayal was a wound still bleeding in memory. He knew that opening the box would mean opening every scar this town had ever tried to hide. From the shadows, a younger man emerged, face bright with reckless energy. Jesse Carter, barely 20, had followed Eli since the last border crossing, eager to prove himself. He said, "This is a sign, Eli. were meant to open it. Eli shot him a glare sharp enough to cut steel. Boy, signs ain't always meant to be followed. Jesse's jaw tightened, pride wounded but not broken. Sheriff Collier muttered, "Send the pup home before he gets killed." Jesse's eyes burned, and he stepped forward, loyal to Eli despite the danger. The town watched the exchange, the younger man's courage clashing with the elder's scars, a torch of idealism daring to burn in the storm. The sound of boots clicking echoed as a figure stepped from the saloon. Maxwell Grant, the wealthiest rancher in town, carried himself with power and venom. His voice cut like glass. "Looks like trouble found its way back home." Eli stiffened, recognizing the shadow of an old enemy. Grant's clean suit contrasted the dust and blood of the street, his eyes cold as stone. The townsfolk lowered their gazes, fear bending them into silence. Jesse whispered, "Who is he?" Eli answered, "The kind that buys souls and sells graves." The tension wrapped tighter, the coffin at the center like bait drawing wolves. Grant smiled thinly, knowing fear had already taken hold of the town. An old man leaned against a post at the edge of the crowd, eyes shadowed beneath a wide-brim hat. Samuel Hayes, once a feared gunslinger, now moved with the stiffness of old scars. He called out, "Leave the coffin be, Eli. What's buried don't forgive the living." His voice carried the weight of decades of regret. Jesse scoffed, "You're just afraid." Hayes' gaze lingered on the boy, weary but firm. "I've seen too many die for curiosity." Eli met his eyes, torn between respect and defiance. Hayes' limp was visible as he stepped forward, hand resting on a cane carved from oak. In his silence he offered Eli the kind of wisdom only the dying could give. From the balcony above the saloon, velvet drapes stirred, and a woman's figure appeared. Isabella Monroe, graceful yet hardened, gazed down with unreadable eyes. Her crimson dress shimmered under the lantern glow, though her expression was carved in restraint. Eli glanced upward, his chest tightening at the sight of her. She said softly, "Not everything in that box is meant for you." Her words floated like smoke, half-truths twisted with secrets. Grant's gaze flickered upward toward her, his jaw clenching with possession or suspicion. The crowd murmured at her sudden presence, sensing more lies buried in her beauty than in the coffin below. Eli's heart beat heavy, torn between trust and betrayal. The street emptied as dawn broke, painting the dust in pale gold. Eli Morgan stood outside the sheriff's office, fists clenched, eyes burning. He stepped forward and growled, "Collier, the law's rotting under your watch." Sheriff Collier leaned against the doorframe, his badge glinting, voice sharp. I'll. You think you're any better? You've spilled more blood than half the men I've hanged." Eli's voice hardened. "I never sold out my town for silver." The silence between them cracked like gunfire, each word striking deeper. The coffin still lay untouched in the street, a grim reminder that the fight was no longer about wood and nails, but the very soul of the town. Jesse Carter rushed into the street, face pale, eyes wide. "Eli," he shouted, pointing toward the stable. A group of Maxwell Grant's men were dragging a stable hand into the dust. Rifles slung across their shoulders, grins cruel as wolves. Jesse's hand hovered near his revolver, but Eli snapped, "Don't draw unless you plan to kill." The boy hesitated, torn between anger and fear. Sheriff Collier watched without moving, his silence an answer in itself. Eli strode forward, coat flaring, his voice like steel. "Let him go, or your boss will need more coffins." The men smirked, but their hands twitched toward their guns. The moment cracked, and steel flashed. One of Grant's men shoved the stable hand to the ground while reaching for his pistol. Jesse, reckless, fired too fast, the shot striking dirt by the man's boots. Chaos erupted, townsfolk screaming and scattering. Eli drew with lightning speed, his bullet grazing the man's sleeve, stopping him cold. "Next one lands where it matters," Eli warned, voice thunder. Jesse's breath trembled, but Eli stood like stone, protecting the boy. Sheriff Collier stayed still, refusing to intervene, his eyes darting to Grant's saloon instead. The balance of fear shifted, the coffin's silent shadow looming behind every drawn gun. The street fell silent again, only the echo of shots hanging in the air. The coffin stood in plain sight, its presence unshaken, as if mocking the chaos it birthed. A whisper passed through the crowd. "It ain't just a coffin. It's a message." Eli's jaw tightened, hearing what he already feared. Jesse asked, "What's in it, Eli?" His mentor's silence was heavier than words. Sheriff Collier muttered, "Best left shut." But Eli's eyes locked on the nails, gleaming like teeth. Every memory of betrayal bled into his gaze. He knew the truth inside was closer to him than anyone else dared believe. The townsfolk gathered once more, fear etched deeper into their faces. Some whispered prayers, others cursed the day the horse arrived. A farmer spat, "This place is cursed now." Eli stood tall, but inside his chest the weight pressed harder. Jesse whispered, "They look to you, Eli." He shook his head slowly. "They look for someone to blame." Sheriff Collier's voice rose, "Keep your distance from the box. Any man who touches it answers to me." The people shifted, torn between fear of the coffin and fear of the law. In the middle of it all, Eli felt the storm building, each breath carrying the taste of violence yet to come. The saloon's doors creaked open, and Isabella Monroe descended the steps, every gaze pulled to her like moths to flame. Her crimson dress shimmered against the dust, though her eyes carried storms of regret. She stopped in front of Eli, her voice low, "You don't want to open that coffin." Eli's jaw tightened, his words a whisper sharp enough to wound. "You already know what's inside, don't you?" She held his stare, her lips trembling before she forced steel into her tone. "Some truths burn worse than lies." The townsfolk leaned closer, hearing danger clothed in velvet. Maxwell Grant watched from the shadows, his teeth clenched as though her words had betrayed more than her loyalty. Eli's voice cut through the murmurs, steady as iron. "Tell me why you care what's in that box, Isabella." Her gaze flickered toward the coffin, then to the crowd, her expression unreadable. "Because some secrets once unearthed kill more than they save." Jesse Carter stepped closer, eyes wide with suspicion. "Whose side are you on?" Isabella's lips curved faintly, neither smile nor sneer. "The side that survives." The boy's fists clenched, but Eli raised a hand to silence him. His heart twisted with doubt, torn between the memory of her softness and the certainty of her danger. The coffin loomed, unspoken truths tightening chains around them all. The doors of the saloon banged open again, and Maxwell Grant strode into the street, every step echoing power. His voice was a blade, enough whispering, "That coffin belongs to me." Eli's eyes narrowed, his words steady. "Truth don't belong to anyone." Grant laughed coldly, his polished boots crunching dust. "Everything here belongs to me, land, law, and souls." The crowd shifted uneasily, Sheriff Collier lowering his eyes as if ashamed. Jesse muttered, "He's not bluffing." Eli's revolver hand twitched, but he kept it holstered. Grant's grin widened, daring him. "You want what's inside, you'll have to bleed for it." The town held its breath, knowing blood was near. At the edge of the crowd, Samuel Hayes stepped forward, his cane tapping the dirt. His voice carried like thunder weathered by years. "Eli, don't fool yourself. That coffin ain't just yours to face." The old man's eyes gleamed with pain, as if they saw what no one else dared. Eli growled, "You know what's inside." Hayes nodded once, slow and grim. "I know who put it there." The words silenced even the wind. Jesse turned, shocked. "Then why keep it buried?" Hayes' lips trembled, his jaw clenched. "Because the truth costs blood, and I paid enough in my day." Eli's chest tightened, a storm raging in his silence. The night deepened, shadows stretching across the street as lanterns flickered low. Eli's fists clenched, haunted by every betrayal that lived in his scars. The coffin's weight pressed on his chest, though he hadn't touched it. Isabella's gaze lingered on him, soft for only a heartbeat before turning to ice. Maxwell Grant's voice slithered, "Open it, Eli. Let them all see what kind of man you truly are." Sheriff Collier shifted uneasily, torn between law and truth. Jesse whispered, "Don't let him break you." Eli stood silent, his jaw carved in stone. The coffin waited, patient as a predator, daring him to lift its lid. The coffin creaked, the wood straining like it carried a heartbeat of its own. The horse shuddered where it lay, dust rising in thin clouds. Maxwell Grant stepped forward, his voice sharp as glass. "Show them, Eli. Show them what you've been running from." Eli's jaw clenched, sweat tracing the scars on his cheek. He gripped the coffin's lid, his breath ragged. Jesse whispered, "Don't." Isabella's eyes glistened, torn between fear and longing. The nails shimmered like silver teeth, daring him to pry them loose. With one violent pull, Eli ripped the lid back. Gasps tore from the crowd as the lanterns caught what lay within. Inside was no stranger's corpse, but the preserved body of Eli's brother. The street erupted with shock. A woman screamed, a man crossed himself, and whispers cracked like thunder. Jesse staggered back, whispering, "Your brother, he's been here all along?" Eli's chest heaved, his voice low, not by choice. Sheriff Collier stepped forward, face pale, words stuttering. I signed that death notice myself." Eli's eyes burned with fire. "And you buried him in silence." The crowd gasped, their lawman's guilt spilling into the dust. Grant's grin widened, feeding on the chaos. Isabella's eyes shimmered with tears, yet her lips stayed sealed. The coffin glowed under lanterns, a tomb of betrayal, tearing the town's lies wide open. Jesse's voice cracked, his loyalty quivering. "You knew, Eli? You knew he was gone? And you never told me?" Eli turned sharply, his voice thunder. "I didn't know this." Jesse's eyes narrowed, betrayal stinging deeper than fear. "Then why does it feel like every truth dies in your shadow?" The boy's fists trembled at his side, hand twitching near his revolver. Eli's chest ached, the weight of guilt pressing harder than any bullet wound. The crowd murmured, the town's hope flickering as cracks spread between mentor and companion. Grant's laughter rolled through the street like poison, filling the silence with venom. Grant's voice cut through the night like a blade. "Tell them, Eli, who pulled the trigger that day." Eli's breath caught, rage and sorrow twisting in his chest. Isabella whispered, "Don't let him." But Grant stepped closer, eyes glittering. "It was you, wasn't it? You killed your own brother." The crowd recoiled in shock, whispers turning into accusations. Sheriff Collier's silence was damning, his eyes avoiding Eli's. Jesse's voice trembled. "Say it ain't true." Eli's hand shook at his side, truth clawing against the walls of his soul. His silence was louder than any denial, and the town's faith in him shattered. The night split with fury. Eli roared, his voice shaking the lantern flames. "I didn't kill him, Grant did." And Collier helped bury the truth. The words struck like bullets, the crowd gasping in horror. Collier stammered, "Lies," but his trembling hands betrayed him. Jesse's loyalty wavered, caught between two truths. Isabella's tears fell, her voice trembling. "Eli speaks true." Grant's smile faltered, shadows of rage spreading across his face. The coffin lay open, truth exposed, the town fractured. Eli's past was no longer his alone. Blood, betrayal, and justice had fused into one path, and it promised war. Dawn bled across the horizon, painting the sky in fire. Eli Morgan stood in the center of town, revolver heavy at his side, eyes locked on Maxwell Grant. The townsfolk gathered at a distance, breathless, waiting for judgment. Jesse Carter whispered, "Hell kill you, Eli." The older man's voice was calm steel. "Not if I kill him first." Sheriff Collier lingered near the jailhouse, his hand twitching at his weapon but fear chaining his body. Isabella Monroe stood by the balcony, her eyes pleading though her lips stayed still. Grant's boots crunched against the gravel, his grin sharp as a blade. The air stilled, thick with the promise of blood. Samuel Hayes stepped forward, his cane striking dirt, voice like thunder. "This ends today." Eli turned slightly, eyes softening at the old gunslinger. Hayes said, "I'll take the first bullet if it buys you a chance." Eli shook his head, whispering, "You've given enough." But Hayes gripped his revolver with a trembling hand, the weight of years heavy on his shoulders. Jesse shouted, "No!" The boy's voice cracked with fear, but Hayes only smiled faintly, eyes locked on Grant. The old man's scars gleamed in the light, as though his past had come home for one last duel. The street braced for sacrifice. The shot rang out like thunder, tearing the sky. Hayes staggered, clutching his chest, his cane clattering to the dirt. The crowd gasped, a scream piercing the dawn. Grant's revolver smoked, his grin widening. Eli caught Hayes as he fell, the old man's breath rattling. "Don't waste it," Hayes whispered, his hand gripping Eli's sleeve, before falling limp. Eli's heart thundered, rage searing hotter than the desert sun. Jesse's eyes burned with tears, his youth shattered in that instant. The townsfolk shrank back, horror etched across their faces. The sacrifice was made, and the storm had broken loose. Eli rose slowly, fury blazing in his eyes, revolver drawn like judgment itself. "You'll pay for every grave you've dug," he growled. Grant laughed, his pistol raised. "Then let's see who digs the last one." The street froze in silence, the world holding its breath. Jesse shouted, "Eli, don't," but the man no longer heard. Their boots shifted in dust, eyes locked, hands steady, the weight of decades pressing into this single breath. Isabella gripped the balcony rail, tears streaming, whispering prayers too soft to reach. The sun crowned the rooftops as the duel began, time slowing to the pace of fate. The guns roared, fire splitting the silence. Eli's shot struck true, burning through Grant's chest while Grant's bullet grazed Eli's arm. Grant staggered, his polished boots slipping in the dust, disbelief twisting his face. He dropped his revolver, blood soaking his black suit, and fell lifeless beside the coffin. The crowd erupted, some crying, some cheering, others silent with awe. Jesse rushed to Eli's side, gripping his wounded arm. Eli's eyes never left Grant's corpse. "Justice," he muttered, though his voice was hollow. The coffin stood between them all, silent as judgment, its secret no longer hidden but forever haunting. The gun smoke drifted away, leaving only silence broken by the creak of shutters. The townsfolk stepped slowly from their hiding places, their faces a mix of relief and dread. A farmer muttered, "It's done." But others whispered, "We're just begun." Eli Morgan stood over Maxwell Grant's corpse, his revolver lowering, his breath ragged. Sheriff Collier's shoulders sagged, the weight of his guilt dragging him down. He muttered, "This town deserves better than me." The coffin loomed still, its open secret bleeding through every soul gathered. Eli's eyes lifted to the crowd, but he found no triumph, only the hollow weight of survival. Jesse Carter's voice cut through the quiet, trembling yet firm. "We can't let this town stay broken." His eyes were red but steady, the boy's innocence gone, replaced by the weight of a man. Eli studied him, seeing his younger self reflected in those determined eyes. "The world don't hand you justice, Jesse," Eli said, his voice gravel. "You take it and it costs more than you think." The boy clenched his jaw. "Then I'll pay it. For them." The crowd looked toward Jesse now, some nodding, others fearful. The torch had passed, even if the fire still burned uncontrolled. From the balcony, Isabella Monroe descended at last, her crimson dress trailing dust, her face pale and streaked with tears. She moved to Eli's side, her voice breaking. "I wanted to save you from this truth, but I was too late." Eli turned, his eyes hollow. "You've carried your own chains, Isabella." She reached for his hand but stopped short, her courage faltering. Jesse's gaze hardened toward her, suspicion lingering. The townsfolk whispered, their judgment falling heavier than bullets. Isabella whispered, "I'm leaving. This place has no mercy left for me." Her words fell like ash, carried away in the morning wind. Eli holstered his revolver, each motion heavy as stone. Sheriff Collier tried to speak, but his voice cracked. "What happens now?" Eli's gaze swept across the broken faces, the coffin, and the corpse at his feet. "Now you live with what's left." Jesse stepped closer, gripping Eli's shoulder, voice steady. "And you?" Eli's eyes narrowed against the rising sun. I've walked far enough down this road." His boots crunched as he turned away, the dust swallowing his steps. The townsfolk parted silently, some with relief, some with sorrow, as the man who bore their ghosts walked toward the horizon. The coffin lay in the street, its lid open to the sky, the body of Eli's brother still and silent. A wind swept through town, lifting dust like spirits rising. Jesse stood among the townsfolk, his young face hardened, his eyes no longer naive. Isabella turned her back on the town, her dress vanishing into the distance. Sheriff Collier removed his badge, dropping it into the dirt with trembling fingers. Eli's figure grew smaller against the horizon, the weight of his scars trailing behind him. The last sound was not a voice, but the coffin's creak, echoing like a warning that truth never dies.